It was an early evening in bustling New Manhattan, the city of bright lights and fast-paced lives. Melissa Herrera, now a well-established figure in the art world, stood by the large windows of her gallery, watching as the golden light from the setting sun kissed the rooftops of the city. Her art gallery, located in one of the trendiest parts of the city, had become a sanctuary for artists from all over the world. But as Melissa stood there, looking out at the busy street, her mind wandered far away from the success she had achieved. There was a faint yet persistent ache in her heart, a part of her that remained untouched by time and accomplishments. It was the part of her soul that still remembered Daniel Rivas, the man who had once been the center of her universe, the man who had left her without an explanation, breaking her in a way that she never fully recovered from. Tonight, however, wasn't a night to indulge in memories of the past. Her gallery was hosting its annual exhibition, and the who's who of New Manhattan's high society would be in attendance. She turned away from the window, straightening the hem of her black silk dress and forcing a confident smile onto her face. She had mastered the art of looking poised and successful, even though her heart sometimes told a different story. As guests began to arrive, Melissa expertly floated around the room, greeting familiar faces, introducing artists, and making small talk. Her focus was on her guests, ensuring that everything was going smoothly. But amidst the sea of faces, a figure caught her eye. A man standing near the entrance, his tall frame outlined by the warm lights of the gallery. He hadn't moved yet, just stood there, staring at her. Melissa's breath hitched in her throat. Even after all these years, she recognized him immediately. Her heart raced, and for a moment, it felt as if time had rewound itself. Daniel had been away for so long, 10 years to be exact. She had heard from mutual friends that he had left for Europe, disappeared from the social scene, and started a new life. But no one had ever mentioned why he left so abruptly, why he hadn't reached out, or why he chose to disappear without a word. Melissa's immediate reaction was a mixture of shock, confusion, and a deep-seated anger that she had buried for years. He didn't deserve her attention, not after what he had put her through. But the emotions that she had fought to keep at bay all these years now surged forward, unstoppable and overwhelming. Daniel, still standing by the door, gave her a slight nod, acknowledging her. His once boyish charm had matured into a rugged handsomeness that made him stand out even in a crowd of impeccably dressed people. But it was his eyes that unsettled Melissa the most. Those same dark, intense eyes that had once promised her forever, but had left her with nothing but questions and heartache. Melissa turned on her heel, attempting to steady her breathing. She didn't have time for this. Not now. She had guests to attend to, a life to manage, and emotions that were far too complex to unravel in the middle of an art exhibition. Melissa, a voice called from behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know it was him. Daniel's voice was unmistakable, low, gentle, with a tone that always managed to unnerve her. Slowly, she turned, her face a mask of indifference. "Daniel," she replied, her voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil swirling inside her. "It's been a long time," he said softly, his eyes scanning her face as if searching for something, some remnant of the woman he once knew. 10 years, Melissa responded, crossing her arms protectively over her chest. "Yes, it has been a long time. So what brings you back?" Daniel smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Work mostly. I've been doing a lot of legal consulting for international firms." But he hesitated, his eyes locking onto hers. "I came back for other reasons too." Melissa's pulse quickened. She had imagined this conversation so many times in her head, the reunion where she would confront him, demand answers, and finally get closure. But now that he was standing in front of her, all she wanted to do was walk away. "I'm glad you've been busy," she said, her tone dismissive. "If you'll excuse me, I have guests to attend to." Before Daniel could respond, Melissa turned and walked briskly toward a group of patrons, leaving him standing there. Her heart was pounding, and her mind was spinning. How dare he come back in her life after all this time, after breaking her the way he had? As the evening wore on, Melissa found herself constantly aware of Daniel's presence in the gallery. He was mingling with the other guests, looking as if he belonged. But every now and then, she would catch him looking at her, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place. Regret? Longing? She shook her head. It didn't matter. By the time the exhibition was winding down, most of the guests had left, and only a few remained, chatting amongst themselves. Melissa was standing by the wine table, sipping a glass of red when she felt a familiar presence beside her. "Are you going to avoid me all night?" Daniel asked, his voice soft but persistent. Melissa sighed, putting down her glass. "What do you want, Daniel? Why are you here?" Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around the gallery, taking in the art, the ambience, and the life Melissa had built. "You've done well for yourself," he said finally. "This place, it's impressive." Melissa rolled her eyes. "Spare me the compliments. I didn't spend the last decade of my life working hard so that you could come back and congratulate me." Daniel's expression softened. "I'm not here to congratulate you, Melissa. I'm here to explain." Melissa's heart skipped a beat. For so long, she had wanted an explanation, something that would help her make sense of why he left without a word, without any closure. But now, standing in front of him, she wasn't sure she was ready to hear it. "Explain?" she repeated, her voice cold. "What is there to explain? You left, Daniel. You didn't call, you didn't write. You just disappeared." Daniel took a deep breath. "I didn't want to leave you. I had to." Melissa scoffed, crossing her arms. "You had to? That's convenient. I was ready to spend my life with you, and you just vanished. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" "I know," Daniel said, his voice filled with guilt. "And I'm sorry, but there were things happening in my life, things I couldn't tell you about." Melissa narrowed her eyes. "What kind of things?" Daniel hesitated, and for the first time that evening, Melissa saw something vulnerable in his expression. "It's complicated. My family, they were in trouble. I had to go to Europe to help them. I couldn't involve you. It was too dangerous." Melissa blinked, caught off guard by his words. She had always assumed he left because he didn't love her enough. But now, hearing him talk about danger and family, she wasn't sure what to think. "Dangerous?" she echoed, her voice softer now. "What are you talking about?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. "It's a long story, Melissa. But the point is, I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because I had to protect you." Melissa felt a mix of emotions: anger, confusion, and something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Was it possible that he had left to protect her? That he still cared about her? Even after all these years? "I don't know what to say," Melissa said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel took a step closer, his eyes pleading. "I came back because I needed to see you. To explain. To see if there's any chance that we can." "Don't," Melissa interrupted, shaking her head. "Don't say it." Daniel's face fell, and Melissa felt her heart ache. Despite everything, part of her still loved him. But she wasn't ready to forgive him. Not yet. "Good night, Daniel," Melissa said softly, before turning and walking away, leaving Daniel standing alone in the gallery, the weight of their unfinished story heavy in the air. The night after the exhibition passed slowly for Melissa. Sleep was evasive, as memories of her encounter with Daniel replayed in her mind like a film reel that wouldn't stop. She lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of unresolved questions pressing down on her chest. Daniel Rivas, her Daniel, the man who had once made her feel like the most loved woman in the world, had returned. And not only had he returned, but he had also claimed that he left to protect her. It was such a strange and implausible explanation that she couldn't bring herself to believe it fully. Yet part of her heart wanted to. She wanted to believe that the man she had loved so deeply hadn't simply discarded her like a fleeting romance. But what if he had? The doubt gnawed at her. Melissa and Daniel had met when they were both young, ambitious, and full of hope. She was an art student with dreams of opening her own gallery, and he was a promising young lawyer, fresh out of law school. Their love had been immediate, like a spark igniting a fire. And for a while, they had been inseparable. Their worlds, though different, had blended perfectly. He had been her confidant, her supporter, and her greatest source of strength when she doubted herself. Back then, Daniel had been kind, attentive, and always ready to lift her up. But looking back, there were signs she had ignored, moments when he had seemed distant, distracted, as if something was pulling him away from their happy bubble. She had asked him about it many times, but Daniel always brushed off her concerns, telling her it was just work stress or family obligations. Melissa had believed him. After all, love required trust, and she had trusted him with all her heart. Then one day he was gone, no explanation, no goodbye, just a vague message left on her voicemail, telling her that he had to leave and that he was sorry. Sorry? Sorry didn't begin to cover the heartbreak and devastation that followed. Melissa had spent weeks in a fog of disbelief, wondering what she had done wrong. The man she had planned a future with had vanished, leaving her life in disarray. Now, after all these years, he had come back with an excuse that seemed more like a riddle than an answer. Dangerous? Protecting her? What could that possibly mean? The next morning, Melissa found herself standing in front of the large window of her apartment, holding a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The sun was rising over the city, casting long shadows across the streets. Despite the warm glow outside, a cold knot of confusion and anxiety sat in her chest. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. Julia, her best friend, and the only person who knew the full story of what had happened between her and Daniel. Melissa sighed and picked up the phone. She needed to talk to someone. "Hey," she answered, trying to keep her voice light. "Don't hate me," Julia said on the other end. "I saw him, Mel. I saw Daniel at the gallery last night. Are you okay?" Melissa winced. Of course, Julia had noticed. Nothing escaped her eagle-eyed best friend. "I'm fine," Melissa said, but even she didn't believe the words. It was just unexpected. Unexpected? The guy vanishes for a decade and then shows up out of nowhere. And you're calling it unexpected? That's the understatement of the century. What did he say? Did he give you any kind of explanation? Melissa paused, her grip tightening on the phone. "He said he left to protect me. He didn't really explain what he meant. Something about his family being in danger, and he had to go to Europe." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line before Julia let out a low whistle. "Wow, that's something. Do you believe him?" Melissa didn't answer right away. Did she believe him? She wasn't sure. Part of her wanted to, but another part of her, the part that had spent years building walls around her heart, wasn't ready to trust him again. "I don't know," she admitted. "He didn't give me any details. It's like he expects me to just accept it and move on." "Well, what are you going to do?" Julia asked. "Are you going to talk to him again?" "I don't know," Melissa repeated, her voice quieter now. I need time to process everything." Julia sighed. "Okay, but remember, you don't owe him anything. Not after what he did to you. You've moved on. You're strong, successful, and you've built a great life for yourself. Don't let him mess with your head." "I know," Melissa said, though a part of her wasn't entirely convinced. "Thanks, Jules." "Anytime," Julia replied. "And if you need to vent or scream into the void, you know where to find me." Melissa smiled faintly. "I'll keep that in mind." As she hung up the phone, Melissa took a deep breath and leaned against the counter. Julia was right. She didn't owe Daniel anything. She had spent the last 10 years rebuilding her life from the ground up, and she wasn't about to let him waltz back in and undo all of that. But as much as she tried to convince herself, there was a small part of her that still wondered. What if he was telling the truth? What if there really had been something more to his disappearance than she had realized later that afternoon? As Melissa was preparing to head to a meeting with an important client, there was a knock at her door. She frowned, glancing at the clock. She wasn't expecting anyone. Setting down her briefcase, she walked over to the door and opened it, only to freeze when she saw who was standing on the other side. "Melissa," he said softly, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket. "I know I should have called, but I needed to see you. Can we talk?" Melissa's first instinct was to slam the door in his face. She didn't have time for this, not now. But something in Daniel's expression stopped her. There was a sincerity there, a vulnerability that she hadn't seen before. He looked different. Older, yes, but also more worn, as if the weight of the years had finally caught up to him. "I don't have time for this right now," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "I'm on my way to a meeting." "Please," Daniel said, his voice low. Just give me 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Melissa hesitated. 5 minutes. What could 5 minutes hurt? "Fine," she said, stepping back to let him in. "But after that, I have to go." Daniel nodded gratefully and stepped inside, glancing around her apartment. "You've done well for yourself," he said, echoing his earlier compliment from the gallery. "Cut to the chase, Daniel," Melissa said, crossing her arms. "You said you had to leave to protect me. What did that mean? And don't give me any vague, cryptic answers. I deserve the truth." Daniel looked at her for a long moment before taking a deep breath. "My family was involved in something dangerous. My father had made some bad business deals with people he shouldn't have. When I found out, I tried to fix things, but it was too late. We were being threatened, blackmailed. They told me that if I didn't cooperate, they would come after the people I cared about. That meant you." Melissa's heart pounded in her chest. "Why didn't you tell me? I could have handled it. We could have handled it together." Daniel shook his head. "I couldn't take that risk. I didn't want you to get hurt. So I left. I went to Europe to deal with the situation, and it took years to clean up the mess. By the time it was over, I thought you had moved on. I didn't want to disrupt your life." Melissa stared at him, her mind racing. It was a lot to take in. If what he was saying was true, then his disappearance hadn't been because he didn't love her. It had been to protect her. But that didn't change the fact that he had left her alone, without any explanation, for 10 long years. "You should have told me," she said, her voice trembling. "I spent years wondering what I had done wrong. I deserved better than that." "I know," Daniel said, his voice thick with regret. "And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Melissa. If I could go back and do things differently, I would." Melissa's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away, refusing to let him see her cry. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she whispered. Daniel's expression crumbled, and for a moment, he looked like the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. Vulnerable, sincere, and full of regret. "I understand," he said quietly, "but I had to try." After Daniel left, Melissa found herself standing in the quiet of her apartment, shaken. His words echoed in her mind. His family, the threats, the danger. Could it all be true? The part of her that had been so furious with him, that had blamed him for all those years of heartache, didn't want to believe it. But the part of her that still loved him, that had never truly let go, ached with the possibility that his actions had been out of love, not abandonment. She sank into the sofa, her mind racing. If Daniel's story was true, it meant that everything she had believed about their breakup had been wrong. It meant that he hadn't simply left her, but had sacrificed their relationship for her safety. But why hadn't he trusted her enough to tell her? Why had he assumed that she couldn't handle the truth? A couple of days passed, and Melissa was still grappling with her thoughts when she decided to call Julia. She needed her best friend's blunt, no-nonsense perspective, someone to help her navigate through the emotional chaos that Daniel's return had caused. "Jules, can we meet?" "I need to talk," Melissa said, her voice strained over the phone. "Absolutely. My place or yours?" Julia responded without hesitation. "Yours. I need to get out of here," Melissa said, glancing around her apartment. The walls felt like they were closing in on her, suffocating her with memories and questions. Within the hour, Melissa found herself sitting on Julia's balcony, sipping a cup of tea. The city below them buzzed with life, but up here, it felt like they were in their own little world. Julia sat beside her, waiting patiently for Melissa to begin. "I talked to him," Melissa said finally, staring into her cup. Julia raised an eyebrow. "Daniel?" "Yeah," Melissa nodded. "He came to my apartment and explained everything. Why he left." "And?" Julia prompted, her voice cautious. "What did he say?" Melissa recounted the conversation, Daniel's story about his family, the threats, the danger he claimed had forced him to leave. As she spoke, Julia listened intently, her expression unreadable. When Melissa finished, there was a long silence between them. Finally, Julia leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest. "Okay, so let me get this straight," Julia began. "He disappeared for 10 years because his family was involved in something shady, and he was afraid these people would come after you? So, instead of talking to you, he just left?" "That's what he said," Melissa replied, her voice uncertain. He said he didn't want to put me in danger. Julia shook her head, a frown creasing her brow. That's a pretty big assumption on his part, don't you think? I mean, if he really cared about you, wouldn't he have trusted you enough to tell you what was going on? That's what I said, Melissa exclaimed, her frustration bubbling to the surface. But he just kept saying that he didn't want to risk it, that he thought leaving was the best way to protect me. Julia was quiet for a moment, thinking, look, Mel, I'm not saying he's lying. Maybe he really did think he was doing the right thing. But disappearing without a word? For 10 years? That's not okay. You can't just come back and expect everything to go back to the way it was. I know, Melissa said, her shoulders slumping. But I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to believe him, to forgive him. But another part of me is still so angry. I don't know if I can trust him again. Julia reached out and squeezed her hand. Whatever you decide, you need to take your time. Don't let him rush you into anything. He doesn't get to waltz back into your life and dictate how this goes. You're in control now, not him. Melissa nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for her friend's unwavering support. Julia was right. She needed to take her time to figure out what she wanted, not what Daniel expected from her. It was her life or heart on the line. A week later, just as Melissa was beginning to think that she had some clarity on the situation, Daniel texted her. Can we have dinner? There's more I need to tell you. I understand if you don't want to, but I hope you'll give me the chance to explain. Melissa stared at the message for a long time, her emotions in turmoil. She had been trying so hard to regain control, to put Daniel's return into perspective. But the truth was, she still had questions. And as much as she wanted to protect herself, she also wanted answers. After a long internal debate, she responded with a simple, okay. They agreed to meet at a quiet restaurant not far from Melissa's gallery. It was a place they had once frequented during their time together, and the familiarity of it made her stomach twist with nervous anticipation. Melissa arrived early, her heart pounding as she walked into the restaurant. It was dimly lit, with soft music playing in the background. She was shown to a table near the window, where she could watch the city lights twinkle outside. A few minutes later, Daniel arrived. He looked more relaxed than the last time she had seen him, but there was still a tension in his eyes, a weight that he was carrying. He greeted her with a tentative smile as he sat down across from her. Thank you for coming, Daniel said, his voice soft but sincere. I almost didn't, Melissa replied honestly, folding her hands on the table. But I still have questions. And you deserve answers, Daniel said, his expression serious. There's more I need to tell you, Melissa, about what happened after I left. Melissa tensed, bracing herself. What do you mean? Daniel hesitated for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. When I left, I thought it was the only way to keep you safe. But it wasn't just about the threats. I wasn't in a good place mentally. I was dealing with a lot of guilt, a lot of fear. I didn't know how to handle it, and I made some bad choices. Melissa frowned. What kind of choices? I got involved with people I shouldn't have, Daniel admitted, his voice low. In an attempt to fix my family's problems, I ended up making things worse. It took years to get out of it, to clean up the mess I had made. That's why I stayed away for so long. I didn't want to drag you into the chaos. Melissa stared at him, the weight of his confession sinking in. She had always imagined that his disappearance was about something simple, fear, or maybe even indifference. But this was more complicated, more tangled than she had ever imagined. You should have told me, she said again, her voice trembling with emotion. I would have understood. We could have worked through it together. I know, Daniel said, his eyes filled with regret. I see that now. But back then I was scared. Scared of losing you. Scared of what might happen to you if you stayed with me. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong. The vulnerability in his voice, the raw emotion, made it hard for Melissa to hold on to her anger. She had been hurt, yes, but she could see now that Daniel had been hurting too. They had both suffered in different ways, and the years between them had been filled with pain and regret. I don't know if I can forgive you, Melissa whispered, echoing the words she had spoken to him before. Daniel nodded, his expression pained but accepting. I understand. I needed you to know the truth. They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of everything that had been left unsaid over the years finally coming to the surface. Melissa's heart ached with the complexity of it all. She had loved him once with a passion that had consumed her. And now, here he was, offering her the truth she had longed for, but at a price. As the evening drew to a close, Daniel walked her out of the restaurant. The cool night air wrapped around them, and for a moment, they stood together, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. "Melissa," Daniel said softly, turning to face her, "I don't expect you to forgive me or to take me back. I want you to know that I never stopped caring about you. I never stopped loving you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with emotion. Melissa looked up at him, her heart pounding. She had spent years trying to move on from him, to forget the love they had shared. But standing here now, with him so close, she realized that a part of her had never truly let go. "I need time," she said finally, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "I don't know what the future holds, Daniel, but I need time to figure it out." Daniel nodded, his expression both hopeful and resigned. "Take all the time you need." With that, they parted ways, leaving Melissa to walk home alone, her mind swirling with thoughts of the past, the present, and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The days following Melissa's conversation with Daniel felt like she was living in a fog. Everything seemed surreal. The revelation that the man she had loved was never truly gone emotionally, even though he had disappeared physically. Her heart and mind were at war, fighting over the decision to either give Daniel a second chance or leave the past behind forever. One morning, she found herself standing in front of her gallery, staring at the artwork through the large windows. It was a place of refuge for her, a place that had helped her rebuild her life after Daniel had left. But now, it felt like a reminder of everything that had unraveled. She needed clarity, and there was only one person she knew who could help her see things more clearly: her father. Melissa's father, William, had always been her rock. He was a quiet man, someone who listened more than he spoke, but when he did give advice, it was always insightful and genuine. They hadn't spoken much about Daniel over the years, mostly because Melissa had avoided the topic. But now, with everything out in the open, she felt the need to talk to him. She needed to know how he saw things, as someone who had lived through his own fair share of heartbreaks and second chances. Later that afternoon, Melissa drove to her parents' house. The small, cozy home nestled on the outskirts of the city was where she had grown up, and stepping inside always brought her a sense of peace. As she entered, the familiar scent of her mother's cooking filled the air, but it was her father she sought today. She found him in his study, sitting in his old armchair, reading a book. He looked up as she walked in, his face breaking into a warm smile. "Hey, sweetheart," William greeted her, setting the book aside. "What brings you here? Everything okay?" Melissa sat down across from him, feeling the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her. "I need to talk to you, Dad. About Daniel." Her father's smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of quiet concern. "Ah, Daniel. I heard he was back in town." "He is," Melissa confirmed. He came to see me." He explained why he left. William leaned back in his chair, nodding slowly. "And what did he say?" Melissa recounted the story once again, telling her father about Daniel's family, the threats, and the decisions he had made out of fear and desperation. As she spoke, her father listened intently, his expression thoughtful but unreadable. When she finished, William was silent for a long moment, as if processing everything she had said. Finally, he sighed and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Melissa," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "I know you've been through a lot because of Daniel, and I understand why you're conflicted. But you have to ask yourself something very important. Are you holding on to the love you had for him, or are you holding on to the idea of what could have been?" Melissa frowned, her heart clenching at his words. "What do you mean?" "What I mean," her father continued, "is that sometimes we fall in love with someone, and when things don't work out, we end up holding on to the dream of what we thought the relationship would become. But dreams and reality aren't always the same thing. If you decide to give Daniel another chance, you need to be sure that you're ready to accept him for who he is now, not just who you remember him being." Melissa sat in silence, her father's words sinking in. He was right, so much time had passed. She and Daniel weren't the same people they had been 10 years ago. Could she really love him now, after everything that had happened? And another thing, William added, his eyes softening. You need to forgive yourself, too. You spent a long time blaming yourself for his leaving, thinking you did something wrong. But it wasn't your fault, Melissa. It was his choice, and you have every right to protect your heart now. Don't feel guilty for being cautious. Melissa felt a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't realized how much guilt she had carried over the years, how much she had internalized Daniel's decision to leave as a reflection of her own worth. But hearing her father's words lifted a weight from her chest, one she hadn't even known she was carrying. Thanks, Dad, she whispered, wiping away a tear. I don't know what to do. William reached out and took her hand. You'll figure it out, sweetheart. Just remember, whatever decision you make, it has to be what's right for you. Not for Daniel, not for anyone else, just you. The conversation with her father gave Melissa a new perspective. She realized that before she could make any decisions about Daniel, she needed to come to terms with her own feelings. She couldn't move forward until she had healed the part of her heart that had been broken so long ago. In the days that followed, Melissa threw herself into her work at the gallery. She found solace in the art around her, the creative energy that flowed through the space. It was her way of grounding herself, of finding balance in the midst of the emotional whirlwind that Daniel's return had stirred up. One evening, as she was closing up the gallery, she received a text from Daniel. I know I've asked a lot of you, but would you be willing to meet me one more time? I have something important to say. Melissa stared at the message for a long time, her heart racing. She had already heard his explanation, already listened to his apologies. What more could there be? But something in his words, in the tone of the message, made her hesitate. She knew she needed closure. Whether it led to reconciliation or finality, she needed to face him one last time to truly move on. They agreed to meet at a park just outside the city, a quiet place with walking paths and a small lake. It was a place they had once visited together, years ago, when things had been simpler. The nostalgia of it tugged at Melissa's heart, but she pushed the emotions aside as she arrived. Daniel was already there, standing by the edge of the lake, his hands in his pockets. He looked up as she approached, and for a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. I didn't know if you'd come, Daniel said softly, his voice laced with uncertainty. I almost didn't, Melissa admitted, crossing her arms over her chest. But I think we both need this, for closure, if nothing else. Daniel nodded, his expression serious. I agree. They stood there for a moment longer before Daniel finally spoke again, his voice trembling slightly. Melissa, I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for. And I know you probably don't trust me right now. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. Not for a second. Melissa's heart clenched at his words, but she forced herself to stay calm, to keep her emotions in check. Daniel, love isn't enough. You left me without a word for 10 years. You can't just come back and expect everything to be the same. I know, Daniel said quickly. I'm not asking for that. I want you to know that I regret every single day I was away from you. I thought I was protecting you, but I realize now that I was just running away. I was a coward, and I'm sorry. Melissa stared at him, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the regret etched on his face. But could she trust him again? Could she open her heart to him after everything they had been through? I don't know if I can forgive you, she said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Daniel's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, it looked like he was going to walk away. But then he took a deep breath and stepped closer to her, his eyes pleading. Please, Melissa, I'm not asking for you to forgive me right now. I'm just asking for a chance to prove that I've changed, that I'm not the same person who left you all those years ago. Melissa's heart ached with the weight of his words. She had spent so long guarding herself, protecting her heart from the pain of the past. But standing here, with Daniel so close, she realized that she still loved him. Despite everything, a part of her had never let go. I don't know what the future holds, Melissa said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. but maybe we can start over." Daniel's eyes lit up with hope, and for the first time in a long time, Melissa felt a glimmer of hope too. Maybe they could start over. Maybe they could heal the wounds of the past and build something new, something stronger. As they stood by the lake, watching the sun set over the horizon, Melissa felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, she was ready to face it, together with Daniel. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting hues of pink and gold across the sky, Melissa and Daniel stood side by side, their hearts uncertain but open. The words Melissa had spoken, "Maybe we can start over," hung in the air between them, a fragile promise of possibility, of healing. For the first time in years, Melissa allowed herself to hope. The decision to give Daniel a chance wasn't one she had made lightly. It came with hesitation and fear, but it was also born out of the undeniable truth that her feelings for him had never truly faded. Her father had told her to follow her heart, but also to be cautious. This was her first step toward reconciling the two. The days that followed their meeting were awkward, yet filled with a quiet optimism. Daniel, true to his word, didn't push Melissa for more than she was ready to give. Instead, he focused on rebuilding the trust that had been shattered so many years ago. He called her often, not with grand declarations of love, but with small, meaningful gestures. He would ask how her day had been, offer to bring her coffee, or invite her to lunch. Melissa, for her part, remained guarded but receptive. She could see the effort he was making, the genuine remorse in his eyes whenever they spoke. It wasn't easy, though. Every time she looked at him, memories of the pain she had endured when he left would surface. She found herself questioning whether she was making the right choice, whether she was being foolish to even consider letting him back into her life. Her gallery became a sanctuary for her thoughts. Every morning, she would arrive early, walking slowly through the quiet space, letting the artwork around her speak in ways her heart couldn't. One afternoon, while preparing for a new exhibition, she found herself staring at a painting that had always resonated with her. A portrait of a woman standing at a crossroads, two paths stretching before her. It was a reminder that every choice in life comes with consequences, some of which can change everything. While Melissa was grappling with her own emotions, Daniel was facing his own demons. The decision to come back to her had not been easy. He had left to protect her from the darkness of his family's affairs, but now, being back in her life, he wondered if he had made the right choice. His father's criminal dealings had tainted everything, and although Daniel had distanced himself from it, the shadow of his family still loomed over him. Every time he looked at Melissa, he was reminded of the reason he had left in the first place. He wanted to protect her from the danger, but now he had to confront the fact that leaving had caused her more harm than staying ever could. Despite this, Daniel knew he couldn't let fear rule his life any longer. He had returned to make amends, and that was exactly what he was going to do. He began to open up to Melissa about the things he had never shared before, about his father, the threats, the pressure he had been under. He didn't sugarcoat it, and he didn't ask for her sympathy. He simply wanted her to understand the full picture, even if it was ugly. To his relief, Melissa listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't judge, just listened. And in that moment, he realized that for the first time in his life, he wasn't facing this alone. Weeks turned into months, and slowly but surely, Melissa and Daniel began to rebuild their relationship. It wasn't the same as it had been before. It couldn't be. Too much had changed, and they were both different people now. But perhaps that was a good thing. This time, there were no illusions, no idealized version of what their love should be. This time, it was real, raw, and grounded in truth. One evening, Daniel invited Melissa to dinner at a small, intimate restaurant just outside the city. It was a place they had never been before, somewhere neutral where they could continue getting to know each other again. As they sat across from each other, sipping wine and talking about everything from their favorite books to their hopes for the future, Melissa felt something shift. She realized that the anger she had held on to for so long was slowly melting away. It wasn't that she had forgotten the pain, but she had come to understand it. She could see now that Daniel's actions, though misguided, had been driven by a deep sense of love and protection, and that knowledge brought her a sense of peace. After dinner, they walked through the quiet streets, the night air cool against their skin. They didn't say much, but the silence between them felt comfortable, not strained. As they approached Melissa's car, Daniel stopped and turned to her, his expression serious. "Melissa," he began, his voice low but steady, "I know I've said this before, but I need you to know that I mean it. I'm sorry for everything, for leaving, for hurting you. I can't change the past, but I want to be part of your future. If you'll let me." Melissa looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability he rarely showed. And in that moment, she knew that she was ready. Ready to let go of the past, ready to take a chance on the future. "I want that too, Daniel," she said softly. "But we need to take this slow. We need to make sure we're both ready." Daniel smiled, a genuine, relieved smile. "Of course, whatever you need, I'm here." As the months passed, Melissa and Daniel's relationship continued to grow. They spent more time together, not rushing into anything, but allowing their connection to deepen naturally. They traveled together, explored new places, and rediscovered parts of themselves they had forgotten. For Melissa, it was a time of healing. She no longer felt the weight of the past pressing down on her, and for the first time in years, she felt truly happy. She had forgiven Daniel, but more importantly, she had forgiven herself. The guilt she had carried for so long was gone, replaced by a sense of freedom and peace. For Daniel, being with Melissa again felt like coming home. He had spent years running from his past, from the mistakes he had made, but now he was ready to face them head on. He had found a new sense of purpose, not just in his relationship with Melissa, but in his life as a whole. He had left behind the toxic influence of his family, choosing instead to forge his own path, a path that led him back to the woman he had always loved. One evening, as they sat on the porch of Melissa's house, watching the sunset, Daniel turned to her, a soft smile on his lips. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice gentle, "about the future, about us." Melissa looked at him, her heart skipping a beat. "What about it?" "I want to spend the rest of my life with you," Daniel said, his eyes filled with emotion. "I know we've been taking things slow, and I'm not rushing anything, but I want you to know that I'm committed to you, to us. Whatever comes next, I'm all in." Melissa's heart swelled with love. She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "I don't know what the future holds, but as long as we're together, I'm ready for anything." In the months that followed, Melissa and Daniel continued to build their life together. They faced challenges as all couples do, but they faced them as a team. Their love was no longer the idealized romance of their youth, but something much deeper, much stronger. It was a love forged in the fires of pain and loss, but one that had emerged stronger for it. Eventually, Daniel proposed, not with an elaborate gesture, but in the quiet, intimate way that had become their trademark. He asked her to marry him one evening as they sat together on the couch, watching a movie. And Melissa, with tears in her eyes, said yes. Their wedding was a small, intimate affair surrounded by close friends and family. As they exchanged vows, Melissa felt a sense of peace and joy wash over her. This was where she was meant to be, with the man she loved, ready to face whatever the future held. And as they danced together that night, under the stars, Melissa knew that no matter what happened, they would be okay, because they had each other. With the promise of their future now tangible, Melissa and Daniel stepped into the next phase of their relationship. The world seemed to glow with possibilities, and as they navigated the intricacies of balancing their past with the future they wanted to create, they grew stronger together. Their love, once bruised and delicate, now flourished, rooted in shared understanding, trust, and a renewed sense of purpose. Melissa's gallery became a pivotal part of their life together. Daniel, though busy with his work in architecture, made time to support her passions, often accompanying her to exhibitions and helping her organize events. Together, They found joy in celebrating the beauty of art, but more importantly, they found joy in simply being together, rediscovering the magic they had once shared but now with deeper, more profound connections. Despite the joy in their relationship, the remnants of the past still loomed in the background. Daniel, though committed to a life away from his family's criminal dealings, could not entirely escape the shadow cast by his father's legacy. It wasn't long before news reached them that Daniel's father, the once powerful figure who had manipulated so many lives, had fallen ill. His empire, once vast and intimidating, was crumbling, and with it came the threat of secrets being exposed, secrets that could potentially harm Daniel's new life with Melissa. Daniel wrestled with this information in silence for several weeks. He didn't want to burden Melissa with the darkness he had long tried to shield her from. But keeping secrets from her was no longer an option. The weight of his father's illness and the potential fallout gnawed at him, threatening to unravel everything they had built. One evening, as they sat together in the comfort of their home, Melissa sensed the heaviness in Daniel's heart. She could always tell when something was troubling him. Gently, she placed her hand on his, her eyes full of concern. "Daniel, what's going on? You've been distant these past few days." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair as he gathered his thoughts. "It's my father," he finally admitted, his voice strained. "He's sick, dying, actually, and with him, everything he's been involved in is falling apart." Melissa listened quietly, letting him speak. She knew this was difficult for him, and she wanted to offer her support in any way she could. "I don't care about the empire or his legacy," Daniel continued. "I never wanted any part of it. But there are things he kept hidden, things that could come to light now. If that happens, it could affect everything we've worked for." Melissa squeezed his hand. "We'll face it together," she said softly. "Whatever happens, we'll deal with it. You don't have to carry this burden alone." Daniel looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude and love. He had been so afraid of letting the darkness of his past touch their future. But here was Melissa, unwavering in her support, reminding him that they were a team. "I love you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you too," she replied, her eyes shining with determination. "And we'll get through this." A few days later, Daniel received word that his father's condition had worsened, and despite the estrangement between them, he felt an obligation to visit him one last time. Melissa, ever supportive, insisted on accompanying him. She knew this was something Daniel needed to face, but she also knew that he didn't have to face it alone. The visit to the hospital was tense. Daniel's father, a once formidable man, now lay weak and frail in the sterile hospital bed. His eyes, once sharp and calculating, were clouded with illness and regret. As Daniel stood at the foot of the bed, the weight of their complicated relationship pressed down on him. "You're here," his father rasped, his voice barely audible. "I didn't think you would come." Daniel swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. The anger he had felt toward his father for so many years was still there. But now, in the face of his father's mortality, it was tempered with a strange sadness. "I'm here," Daniel finally said, his voice tight. "But I didn't come for you. I came to say goodbye, to put an end to all of this." His father's eyes flickered with something. Regret, perhaps, or resignation. "I made mistakes," he admitted, his voice weaker now. "But everything I did was for the family. For you." Daniel shook his head. "You didn't do it for me. You did it for power, for control. And it destroyed everything. It almost destroyed me." His father closed his eyes, as if the truth of Daniel's words was too much to bear. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry." It wasn't the apology Daniel had longed for. It wasn't enough to erase the years of pain and betrayal. But in that moment, Daniel realized that he didn't need his father's apology. He didn't need closure from the man who had caused so much damage. He had found his own closure, through Melissa, through the life he had rebuilt, and through the love they shared. Without another word, Daniel turned and left the room, Melissa following closely behind. As they walked out of the hospital, a sense of finality washed over him. He had closed the door on that chapter of his life, and now he was ready to fully embrace the future. With his father's passing, Daniel was finally free from the last ties to his family's dark legacy. There were legal matters to settle, of course, but none of it held any weight over him. He had made his choice long ago, and now, with Melissa by his side, he could focus on the life they were building together. Their relationship, already strong, grew even deeper in the months that followed. They talked more openly about their future, about marriage, about starting a family, about all the things they wanted to accomplish together. Melissa's gallery continued to thrive, and Daniel's architectural firm began taking on larger, more prestigious projects. One afternoon, while they were sitting in the garden of their home, sipping tea and talking about their day, Daniel suddenly grew quiet. Melissa noticed the change in his demeanor and looked at him curiously. "What's on your mind?" she asked. Daniel set his cup down and turned to face her, his expression serious yet full of love. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he began, taking her hand in his. "About everything we've been through, everything we've overcome. And I know now, more than ever, that I don't want to spend another day without you." Melissa's heart skipped a beat, her breath catching in her throat. She could feel the weight of his words, the significance of what he was about to say. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a simple yet stunning engagement ring, a symbol of everything they had fought for, everything they had built together. "Melissa," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "will you marry me?" Tears filled Melissa's eyes as she looked at the man she loved, the man who had come back into her life and shown her that love was worth fighting for. She smiled through her tears and nodded. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you." Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, and as they embraced, the world seemed to fall away. In that moment, nothing else mattered but the two of them and the future they were going to share. Their wedding, much like their relationship, was a reflection of who they were: intimate, meaningful, and full of love. Surrounded by close friends and family, they exchanged vows under the soft glow of a setting sun, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. As they danced together at the reception, holding each other close, Melissa couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with gratitude. She had never imagined that her life would turn out this way, that she would find such happiness after so much pain. But here she was, married to the man she loved, ready to face whatever the future held. And as they looked into each other's eyes, both of them knew that no matter what challenges came their way, they would face them together. Because their love, though tested by time and circumstance, was unbreakable. With the glow of their wedding still fresh in their hearts, Melissa and Daniel embarked on the next chapter of their lives, marriage. Life felt full of promise as they settled into a shared rhythm, blending their personal and professional lives seamlessly. Though they had already spent years rebuilding their relationship, this new chapter felt like a rebirth, as though they were falling in love all over again, but this time with more certainty. Their newlywed home was a perfect reflection of their union. They had chosen a cozy house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a lush garden where Melissa could lose herself in her art, and where Daniel could find peace after long, demanding hours at work. Daniel's love for architecture and Melissa's love for beauty made them a perfect team when it came to designing their home. Every piece of furniture, every wall color, and every window seemed to tell a story of their journey together. As the months passed, their bond deepened. Melissa's gallery continued to thrive, and Daniel's architectural firm gained more prestigious projects. Despite their busy schedules, they always made time for each other, whether it was quiet dinners at home, spontaneous weekend getaways, or simple moments spent cuddled on the couch. But marriage, as they knew, wasn't always a bed of roses. They faced challenges that tested their communication, their patience, and their ability to navigate life as partners. Yet every disagreement or misunderstanding was another opportunity for them to grow closer, to understand each other better, and to remember why they had fought so hard to be together. Several months into their marriage, during a quiet dinner at home, Melissa hesitated as she glanced at Daniel, her fingers nervously toying with her wine glass. "Daniel, there's something I've been thinking about," she said cautiously, not sure how to approach the topic. Daniel, always perceptive, looked at her with a mix of curiosity and concern. "What is it, love?" he asked, placing his hand over hers. Melissa took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot about expanding our family." For a moment, there was silence. Daniel's brow furrowed slightly as he processed her words, his hand still resting on hers. "You mean starting a family? A baby?" Melissa nodded, her eyes wide with hope and a little uncertainty. "Yes, I know it's a big step, and we're both busy with work, but I can't help but think that maybe it's time." Daniel sat back, his gaze softening as he considered the idea. He hadn't thought much about children in recent years, especially with everything they had been through. But the more he thought about it, the more the idea of building a family with Melissa felt right, natural, even. "You're right," he finally said, his voice calm but filled with certainty. "It is time. I'd love to have a family with you, Melissa. There's nothing I want more." Melissa's heart soared. Tears filled her eyes as she smiled at Daniel, overwhelmed with happiness. The idea of bringing a child into their world, a symbol of their love, their commitment, felt like the next perfect step in their journey. A few months later, their dreams of becoming parents became a reality. Melissa was pregnant, and the joy they felt was unlike anything they had ever experienced. They spent long nights talking about names, decorating the nursery, and imagining what their life would be like once their baby arrived. Melissa's pregnancy was smooth, and Daniel was there every step of the way, attending doctor's appointments, reading parenting books, and making sure that Melissa had everything she needed. His excitement was palpable, and it made Melissa fall even more in love with him. Watching him prepare for fatherhood was a reminder of the caring, nurturing man he had always been. But like everything in life, the journey wasn't without its challenges. As Melissa's due date approached, the anxiety of parenthood set in. Both of them had fears about whether they would be good parents, whether they could balance their demanding careers with raising a child, whether they could protect their baby from the world's uncertainties. But through it all, they leaned on each other, knowing that together, they could face anything. On a crisp autumn evening, after hours of labor, Melissa gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. They named him Lucas, a name that meant light, fitting for the little boy who had already brought so much light into their lives. The moment Daniel held Lucas for the first time, tears filled his eyes. He had never felt so much love, so much responsibility all at once. Melissa, watching him cradle their son, felt her heart swell with happiness. She knew, in that moment, that this was what life was all about: family, love, and the future they were building together. The early days of parenthood were a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and learning to navigate the needs of a newborn. But despite the exhaustion, Melissa and Daniel found joy in every moment. Lucas's first smile, his tiny fingers gripping theirs, the way he looked at them with wide, curious eyes, it made every challenge worth it. Melissa decided to take a break from her gallery to focus on Lucas, a decision she didn't take lightly but knew was right for their family. Meanwhile, Daniel juggled his work and his new role as a father with grace, always making sure that he was present for the important moments, even if it meant working late into the night after Lucas had gone to bed. As the months went by, they found their rhythm. Melissa loved being a mother, and Daniel was a doting father, always eager to spend time with Lucas. Their home, once quiet and serene, was now filled with the sounds of laughter, baby coos, and the occasional late-night cry. But it was perfect. It was everything they had ever wanted. As Lucas grew, so did Melissa and Daniel's dreams for their future. They talked about expanding their family, about finding ways to give back to their community, and about the legacy they wanted to leave for their children. Melissa eventually returned to her gallery, but now with a new perspective. She wanted her work to reflect the beauty of family, the journey of love, and the hope for the future. Her art, once a reflection of her personal struggles, now became a celebration of life, love, and motherhood. Daniel, too, found new inspiration in his work. He began designing homes that focused on family living, spaces where love could flourish, where memories could be made, and where families could grow. His architectural firm became known for its innovative designs that prioritized the needs of families, and his work was celebrated not just for its beauty, but for its heart. Together, they built a life that was not only fulfilling for them, but one that they hoped would inspire others. Their love, once tested by time and circumstance, had blossomed into something more, a partnership rooted in mutual respect, shared dreams, and an unwavering commitment to each other and their family. Years passed, and as they watched Lucas grow into a bright, curious young boy, Melissa and Daniel often marveled at the life they had created. They had faced so many challenges: heartbreak, separation, the shadows of the past. But through it all, their love had endured. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching Lucas play in the yard, Daniel took Melissa's hand in his. "I never imagined my life could be this full," he said, his voice soft but filled with emotion. "I never imagined I could be this happy." Melissa smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Neither did I," she replied. "But we made it. We found our way back to each other, and we built something beautiful." As they sat together, the sun setting in the distance, they knew that their journey was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more ups and downs, more twists and turns. But no matter what the future held, they would face it together, because their love, tested by time and circumstance, had proven to be unbreakable. And as they watched Lucas run toward them, his laughter filling the air, they knew that this life they had built, this family they had created, was their happily ever after. As Lucas turned 2, Melissa and Daniel found themselves navigating the exhilarating and exhausting world of toddlerhood. With every new milestone, his first words, the moment he took his first steps, and his growing curiosity about everything around him, their hearts swelled with pride and joy. However, the reality of parenting was sometimes overwhelming. The tantrums, the sleepless nights, and the challenge of balancing work and family life tested their patience. To maintain their sanity, Melissa and Daniel learned to rely on each other more than ever. They established a system where they shared nighttime duties and carved out moments for just the two of them. They were determined to keep the spark alive in their marriage amidst the chaos of parenting. Date nights became a cherished tradition, whether it was a simple dinner at home after Lucas was asleep or an adventurous outing while grandparents watched him. One evening, as they enjoyed a quiet dinner together, Melissa looked across the table at Daniel, who was playfully trying to get Lucas to eat his vegetables. "Do you remember when we used to think we had it all figured out?" she asked, laughing softly. Daniel smiled, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "I think we thought we could handle anything, until we had a toddler." Their laughter echoed in the room, creating a warm atmosphere that reminded them of the joy they found in each other. As they talked, they also discussed their hopes for Lucas. They envisioned a world full of opportunities for him, a life filled with love, creativity, and the freedom to pursue his dreams. As Lucas grew older, new challenges arose. He was a bright child with an adventurous spirit, which sometimes led to mischief. One day, while Melissa was busy in her studio and Daniel was on a work call, Lucas managed to paint the living room wall with crayons, transforming their pristine space into a colorful disaster. When they discovered the artistic mess, they couldn't help but burst into laughter. "Looks like our little Picasso is at it again," Daniel chuckled, his eyes sparkling with amusement. Melissa shook her head, but a smile crept across her face. "We should have seen this coming. Maybe we should set up a designated art space for him?" That evening, they dedicated a corner of the house as Lucas's art zone, complete with paper, crayons, and paint. It became a haven for creativity, a space where Lucas could explore his artistic talents without the fear of ruining their home. However, it wasn't just art that required their attention. Lucas was beginning to socialize with other kids, and Melissa and Daniel realized the importance of teaching him values like empathy, kindness, and sharing. They took him to playdates and enrolled him in a preschool that emphasized these values, allowing him to grow in a nurturing environment. As Lucas entered preschool, Melissa and Daniel watched him blossom. He made new friends, learned to share his toys, and began to express his feelings verbally. The growth they witnessed in their son was a testament to the strong foundation they had built as parents. They attended school events together, cheering for Lucas during his first performance. He sang off-key, but with so much enthusiasm that it brought tears to Melissa's eyes. "That's my boy," she exclaimed, beaming with pride. At home, Melissa and Daniel made it a point to have family dinners. They wanted to create a space where Lucas felt comfortable expressing himself. During these dinners, they shared stories about their day, encouraging Lucas to share his thoughts and feelings. This open communication not only strengthened their bond, but also provided Lucas with the tools he needed to navigate the world confidently. As they embraced the joys and challenges of parenthood, Melissa and Daniel found themselves discussing the idea of expanding their family again. They often talked about how wonderful it would be for Lucas to have a sibling, someone to share adventures with, to laugh and play alongside. One evening, as they tucked Lucas in a bed, Melissa turned to Daniel. "What do you think about trying for another baby?" she asked, her heart racing at the thought. Daniel smiled, wrapping his arm around her. "I think it sounds like a great idea. Lucas would be an amazing big brother." With their hearts set on expanding their family, they began the beautiful journey of trying for another child. The process, filled with hope and anticipation, was also tinged with anxiety. Melissa wanted to provide Lucas with the best life possible, and the thought of balancing two children felt daunting. Yet, they faced the uncertainty together, relying on their love and support for each other. After a few months of trying, Melissa discovered she was pregnant again. The joy and excitement they felt were indescribable. They shared the news with Lucas, who couldn't quite grasp what it meant but was thrilled to know he would have a sibling. As the months progressed, Melissa and Daniel prepared for the arrival of their second child. They decorated the nursery together, ensuring that Lucas felt included in the process. He picked out colors and even helped arrange the furniture, making it a family project. When the day finally arrived, it was a whirlwind of emotions. Melissa went into labor, and Daniel was by her side, just as he had been with Lucas. Their hearts raced with anticipation, and when their baby girl was born, they felt an overwhelming sense of completeness. They named her Mia, a name that signified mine. The moment Lucas met his baby sister, he beamed with pride, eager to show her the world he had come to love. Melissa and Daniel watched in awe as their family expanded, feeling their hearts grow with each new addition. Life with two young children was a beautiful chaos. Mornings were a flurry of activity as they juggled breakfast, school drop-offs, and playtime. Evenings were spent reading stories, playing games, and collapsing on the couch once the kids were finally asleep. Despite the exhaustion, Melissa and Daniel reveled in their hectic lifestyle. They found joy in the little moments. Lucas giggling as he played peekaboo with Mia, the way Mia would reach for her brother's hand, and the shared laughter that filled their home. They also learned to lean on their family and friends for support. Melissa's parents and Daniel's siblings were always ready to lend a helping hand, whether it was babysitting, bringing over meals, or simply providing company. They cherished the community around them, feeling grateful for the love and support that surrounded their growing family. As the years rolled on, Melissa and Daniel faced the challenges of balancing their careers, family life, and personal aspirations. They had their share of sleepless nights, but their commitment to each other remained unwavering. They knew that their love was the foundation upon which their family was built. Through it all, they maintained their date nights, even if it was just a quiet dinner after the kids were asleep. They talked about their dreams, their goals, and their future. They knew that while parenting was their current focus, they were also individuals with passions and ambitions. Melissa continued to thrive in her art gallery, showcasing new works that celebrated motherhood and family. Daniel's architectural firm flourished, gaining recognition for innovative designs that prioritized family living. They inspired each other, pushing one another to pursue their dreams while supporting each other unconditionally. As Lucas and Mia grew, Melissa and Daniel watched in amazement as their children developed their unique personalities. Lucas was imaginative, often creating elaborate stories and adventures, while Mia was curious and adventurous, always exploring her surroundings. Family vacations became a cherished tradition, filled with laughter, exploration, and unforgettable memories. Whether it was a beach trip, a camping adventure, or simply spending time at home, they embraced the moments that brought them closer. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Daniel looked around at his family, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. "I wouldn't trade this for anything," he said, raising his glass. "To family. To family," they all echoed, smiles lighting up their faces. Years later, as they celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary, Melissa and Daniel took a moment to reflect on their journey. They had faced challenges, heartbreak, and uncertainty, but through it all, they had built a life filled with love, laughter, and resilience. Sitting on the porch, hand in hand, they watched Lucas and Mia play in the yard, their laughter echoing in the evening air. It was a moment of pure bliss, a reminder of everything they had fought for and accomplished together. "Can you believe it's been 10 years? Melissa asked, her eyes sparkling. Daniel smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "And I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat." With that, they embraced, knowing that their love story was far from over. Together, they had built a life, a family, and a legacy that would continue for generations to come. Their journey was a testament to the power of love, hope, and the belief that no matter what life threw at them, they would face it together, always. Hope you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to like it and subscribe to our channel. Your participation is essential so that we can continue to bring you more incredible stories. Share it with your friends to help our channel grow. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.